Welcome to the Uncovered podcast. I'm Jarrod Kimber. With me is Behram Qazi. We are going to talk about, well, if you're watching on YouTube, you already know because there's all the stuff here, but I'll say it anyway. IPL no balls, Pakistan, New Zealand ODIs, Root's first game, kind of his first game, retiring women from international cricket, and also, because I'm obsessed, Chris Green's Shield contract. And if you're used to me talking about Chris Green, you have to give me some credit for not saying Chris Lynn or Cameron Green in that particular in that intro there. Behram, let's just start at the beginning. The no balls in the IPL, that no ball finish, I suppose, the Sandeep Sharma game. Do you know what I'm talking about here? Is this something you're aware of?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had all of my money, not literally, but I was banking on Rajasthan to win that game. And I remember in the previous Uncovered pod, I mentioned how Yashasvi Jaiswal is the standout young Indian batter of this IPL season. And if Butler and perhaps Sanju Samson clicked, then Rajasthan would become quite destructive given that they have a really, really good bowling attack. And guess what? Butler hit 95, Samson hit 60 odd, Yashasvi got 35 at a quick rate, and they posted 217. Still managed to lose that game. And yes, Sandeep Sharma should go hide in a hole or something for bowling that no ball on the final delivery. And I mean, he couldn't even change the field after that. So it really gave Sunrisers the game on the plate. But also, I would like to mention that the fielding was really, really poor in that game. Sanju Samson dropped a catch behind the stumps, and it's quite unforgivable if you're a keeper. It was a regulation chance. And then a fair few howlers in that last over as well, if I'm not wrong. So I think that it wasn't just the no ball, it was also the fielding that cost Rajasthan on that occasion.
So I'm going to explain the game. I can't remember if it was the game before or two games earlier when he was Sharma was bowling to MS Dhoni. I think they needed 20 off the last over. Dhoni got that down to 7 off 3, and then Sharma bowled around the wicket, completely choked him up, won the game. Take us through what happens at the end of that game. Just, I'm sure most people would know about it now, but just in case they don't. So this is Royals versus Punjab, wasn't it?
It was Royals versus Rajasthan. The Hyderabad, Sunrisers Hyderabad, the recent.
Oh, it was Sunrisers. Yeah, it was. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so basically they needed 48 of 18, I believe, the Sunrisers Hyderabad, and Yuzvendra Chahal had taken a forfeit, and he'd gotten all the main guys out. Abhishek Sharma was playing well; he had him out as well, and it was just one of those games where it seemed like Rajasthan had this one in the bag, particularly after Yuzvendra Chahal got those wickets and ended with a forfeit. But then Glenn Phillips, of course, I love Glenn Phillips, so I'm really happy that he got some runs. He came out and scored, 3 sixes? I believe him and Abdul Samad scored 5 sixes amongst themselves and 1-4 in 14 deliveries. And Sunrisers chased that down, but largely in thanks to some really, really poor fielding by Rajasthan and Sandeep Sharma bowling a no ball on the final delivery. I believe they needed 5 runs off of it. And
so he won,
and everyone was celebrating.
I was going to say he won the game, didn't he? Like the game was won, and then he starts to celebrate, and then obviously it's given us a no ball, and someone hits a 6 then off the second. I'm trying to remember.
4. I think it was a 4 because it was a no ball, right?
So yeah, it
might have been
a
4.
Yeah. But either way, it was absolutely remarkable. I wanted to talk about this for a couple of reasons. I mean, it's just an IPL game and it disappears. One is very annoying for me. I was in the middle of writing the most positive article about Sandeep Sharma, so could not have timed this any worse from my perspective, which is how I follow most cricket games, based on how my narrative is going. But the other thing I found really interesting was I got several messages from people saying, if this was Pakistan, we'd all be asking if this was fixed. Other people going, well, it was a massive no ball, so it had to be fixed and all this sort of stuff. I want to address that head on because it's a really interesting thing. There is almost no games that are fixed anymore, right? It's really hard to fix a game. And by that, I mean the result. So think about it this way, Behram. From a perspective of a fixer, you'd have to be so inside the camp to be able to fix a game like that because you have no idea if it's getting to the last ball. Right? Like, if you're going to fix a game like that, you don't fix the last ball to be a no ball. You would have to fix like the entire last 3 overs. It would have had to have been, there would have been 5 wides, but would have been bowled. There would have been maybe a couple of head high full tosses, all those sorts of things, because you have to absolutely guarantee individual balls generally in the first 14 overs of innings, they are much more likely to be fixed. Over scores, brackets, batters' individual scores, all those sorts of things, very easy to fix. generally the reason we don't see match fixing and everything is spot fixing anymore is not because suddenly everyone has a moral compass. It's just that people realize that you can bet a lot of money on one individual ball, and the betting pools now are so massive that you can get away with this on one ball, on one innings, on one over bracket or one over itself, that it makes a lot more sense. So I think that's the people who are thinking about it that way, it's a bit of an old-fashioned way to look at the game. And I'm not having a go at those people. You know, not everyone is friends with as many fixes as I seem to be. But I think the game has changed how you fix and what you fix to a huge amount. But when it comes down to those last ball finishes, it's I can't promise there's no fix involved in any game that we watch because I don't know. But the first thing I would say is it's always impossible for the fixers to know it was going to come down to that, to be able to get to that point. The other thing that I would say is that there are, when you lose a game like that, as you just said, so what Glenn Phillips made 23 off 7.
25 of 7, I think, and
yeah.
Abdul Samad made 17 of 7. So
yeah.
That's ridiculous.
And so when you do those sorts of things and you smash the ball everywhere and you're putting pressure on, there are generally more no balls and more wides bowled anyway. So I don't know who holds this distinction anymore. It's probably Andre Russell. But the batter who had the most wides bowled to him for a huge amount of years was Chris Gale. And the reason he had the most wides bowled to him is because people are afraid of him, or they're panicking, or the ball doesn't come out the way that they want it to. All those things happen in the death over and over again. And, you know, it's a perfectly normal response to have happen. I can understand that it looks bad when it's the last ball, but like if it was the third last ball, it would still be bad and might still have lost them the game. It's just that in this case, it was at the very worst. And the best one ever was, I want to get this right. I was going to say Mitch Clayton. I don't mean Mitch Clayton. I mean Marchant de Lange, when he was playing against South Africa, when I think the team he was playing against needed 8 runs off the last ball, and he bowled 2 consecutive head-high full tosses and lost the game that way. These things happen. It's just a normal part of it, and I think it's fine to ask those questions, but we have to know what we're asking in the first place. It's just. There are lots of weird things that happen in cricket games. The other thing I would say is when that happens and you see a no ball off the last ball and you go, oh, is there fixing? Like a lot of people sent me messages going, are the ICC going to investigate? The most important thing that you need to know about all this is, what would the ICC actually investigate in that? The only way that they would know to investigate that is if they had pre-corroborating advice that game was fixed, or that a key bowler was going to bowl a no ball at a very important time, or whatever that may be. And if they had that evidence, the no ball actually wouldn't be the thing they would be investigating. They'd be investigating that original evidence. So if you look at the Muhammad Asif and Muhammad Amir situation, the ICC basically had pre-existing evidence that those balls were going to be fixed and that they were fixed. Even if you look at the Srisanth over, although that one's a little bit more cloudy because he didn't actually end up fixing the over the way he was supposed to. But again, they had pre-existing evidence that meant that they were going to look at those situations. That is very different than your favorite bowler coming in and bowling a wide at the end. I think we were looking at, there was an over by Patharana recently. I'm trying to remember. That must have been the washed out game that Chennai played, where they were completely on top, and the team was absolutely on top, and Patharana came in and bowled 5 wides, and he'd been all over everyone at that stage. That 5 wides actually allowed was it Sunrisers in that game?
Lucknow? I think it was Lucknow.
Maybe it was. God, I can't even remember who's playing. But yeah, you might be right. It might have been Lucknow. But to get back into that game, now no one accused him of fixing. Right, that wasn't, as far as I actually Googled his name afterwards. I didn't see anyone, suggesting that was fixing. That completely changed the way that they were chasing that innings. They'd hit a 60 over before. He bowled a really good over, and then suddenly he coughed up 5 runs at the end. Extra ball, all that sort of nonsense, and it meant that they ended up getting a decent total. Now it didn't matter because the game was washed out. My point is, he's been a really good death bowler, and this happens. Sandeep Sharma is a fantastic bowler, but these things happen, and we do have to. That's where it becomes tricky with all these things, and that's why you do need a shred of evidence before you just start throwing random players under the bus.
Absolutely, and I mean, just to get idea of how good a bowler Sandeep Sharma is, you best ask Virat Kohli. I reckon he has a very good record against him. But I agree with you that you have to have some sort of pre-existing evidence. And I mean, yes, sure, the Sun, I think, released that, or I forget the newspaper in the Amir Asif scenario. But
yeah, it was news. It was news of the world, actually.
News of the world. News of the world.
Not long after that didn't exist for all the phone hacking, but fun.
Yeah,
sadly for the Pakistani cricketers, not quick enough.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you didn't have that evidence, if you just take a look at that snapshot when Amir bowled that ridiculous no ball and Salman Butt is just eyeing him, I mean, that's quite like suspect. But just look at the facts over here. Sandeep Sharma was defending 17 in that final over, and if he had fixed the game or whatever, then other people had to be in on it. The people who dropped the catches, for instance, and that is far fetched. Even if there is some spot fixing involved, I highly doubt. And of course, this is me just thinking out loud, that multiple people on the same team would be under the book. I think if anything, you would have maximum 1 or 2 people. But also, it's important to mention over here that look at the reactions. They're all celebrating. They've won the game. And then all of a sudden, you see Sanju Samson's face and he's calling everyone back. And he is the most dejected cricketer we've seen in the IPL. That particular snapshot of him, it was very, very heartbreaking for him because he'd done well with the bat. So that would
just to
be
go
like
back on your point,
Oscar-worthy performance, right?
Yeah, just to go back on your point, one of the reasons that match fixing doesn't happen is because you have to pay off too many people, right? That is a big part of why it doesn't happen. The other thing is, if you're going to fix it over like this, and this comes back to the Sreesanth thing, right? Which is why the Sreesanth situation is so confusing. If you're going to fix it over like that, don't wait till the last ball. Right? Like if you know you have to lose the game, the second last ball should go for 5 wides. Right? Or that's the waist high full toss, the slow ball that doesn't do anything, right?
Otherwise, the syndicate will fuck you over, wouldn't they?
Yeah, you don't want to get to the end and the umpire misses the no ball. Yeah, like, you know what I mean?
I think you raised a very valid point when you said that these things are more likely to happen at the start of the game. Take the Shajil Khan case, for instance. He was supposed to play out some dot deliveries at the start of the game. And that happened, and then they had existing evidence, and then Sharjeel was banned. So I don't think okay, sure. I know a lot of people say that, lots of suspect finishes in the IPL, 30 being chased, and then another day, 31 not being chased in 6 overs. Look, this might just be the beauty of cricket, and T20 cricket in particular. The IPL might just be IPLing. Without any evidence, it is very, very unfair to label these sort of accusations. But of course, drawing room talk will always prevail, particularly in the subcontinent, right? So this makes for good fodder for that, but I don't see any sort of reality in it.
I think one thing I would say about the 30, sometimes it's chased and sometimes it's not chased. The thing I would add to that is that cricket is a lot more like now, especially at the end of the game, a lot more like baseball and basketball. In that it's very make or miss, right? So,
right.
I'm trying to remember when I first started doing this. It might have been 2017. I started counting the amount of boundaries that you needed, right, towards the end of the innings, rather than. So I wouldn't say you need 50 off 20 balls, right? I might say you need 8 boundaries,
8 sixes,
yeah, in your next 20 balls or whatever that may be. Yeah, I usually look at it as 5 runs. Right? Because some of them are going to be 6s, some of them are going to be 4s. So you sort of average it out, which is not always true, but that's the way you do it. Not long after that, I heard players start saying stuff like that, right? And you hear it now on the commentary, and when you talk to players, that's what they say. Okay, we need to get 8 more boundaries, right? I can't remember, this was a few years back, but CricViz did something about the amount of times that a batter tried to hit a boundary and the amount of times a batter actually does hit a boundary. And it was about 33% of the time that you actually hit one when you're trying to hit one. And that's about the same as 3-point percentage in the NBA, right? So some days you're going to hit them at 10% of the time, right? And some days you're going to hit them at 50% of the time, right? And so you get to a certain point.
Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, because then you're going to hit them a lot more.
Well, Klay Thompson went, 1 for 8 the other night? 1 for 9, right? Klay Thompson.
I've seen Chris Gale play many innings where he is on a terrible strike rate. So I mean, I saw
Chris Gale. I almost put the two of them together. Then I saw Chris Gale playing a game where everyone was, and sometimes he would bat slow on purpose. We all know that he waited for matchups, and sometimes it took him. But I remember seeing a game where everyone slagged him off for a slow strike rate, and I went back and I counted the amount of times he tried to hit a boundary in this game was ridiculous. He just couldn't. He just missed them, right? So the whole thing is more dramatic. But as you said, The early part of the game is the easy part to fix. That's the bit that was the most suspect, I would say. But it's not the bit that we remember because that's not how memories work. Just one other thing on the IPL I wanted to talk about here was Joe Root. He played his first game and didn't bat. I don't think he bowled either. I'm sure he fielded some balls. I can't remember now, but he didn't field a ball. No, he fielded some. But so he
fielded the ball. Yeah.
Yes, maybe 7. But why I thought it was really interesting is Barney Ronay wrote a piece, and Barney's obviously been on my podcast before and is a mate of mine, but it was really interesting that Barney Ronay wrote a piece, and it kind of is a throwaway line. Like sometimes when you're a writer, you could tell someone's throwaway line, but he said something along the lines of, and Root is being kept out of the side by a middling overseas slogger. And he's talking about Shimron Hetmeyer. Now, Shimron Hetmeyer, I said this a few years ago when I think it might have been in 2018. I remember, I think I was on TalkSport and someone said, you've seen a lot of him. How good could he be? And I said he could definitely average over 40 in Test match cricket. If he really put his heart and soul into it, he could probably average over 45. He'd probably end up with a strike rate of 70 or 80 as well. So it would be high impact runs. I said, but it's not going to happen. All right. They're never going to pay him enough. He's going to work out franchise cricket and, he might still play Test cricket, but even if he does, he won't put his heart and soul into it. So he might, if he averages high 30s.
Also, his boundary hitting percentage might be better than this flight catching percentage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was before he missed any flights. But so from that perspective, I was basically saying, look, he's never going to work this out. But what he will do is spend a lot of time, working out T20 cricket. So I don't think, but it's not. This isn't Barney Ronay's problem. He doesn't cover the IPL. He's enough looking at Shimron Hetmeyer's record. But my guess is that Shimron Hetmeyer has probably averaged over 30 and sometimes over 35, sometimes over 40, pretty regularly over the last 4 or 5 years, with a strike rate of minimum 140, sometimes 145, sometimes well above that. He's not just a middling overseas slogger, right? He's a proper player. And the reason that Shimron Hetmeyer got so good at this is because he specialized in T20 cricket. Right. And the arguments I saw from Barney Ronay and other English journalists and English fans was a very similar argument I remember the South Africans making about Vernon Philander, where I remember Telford Vice wrote a piece about Vernon Philander and he's like, how could Ben Cutting be in the IPL and Vernon Philander isn't? Well, I tried to get Vernon Philander into one of the teams I was working with. And the overall theory was that Vernon Philander didn't care about T20 cricket. They didn't practice T20 cricket. And that if he did, he'd actually be pretty good. Because I was showing them his numbers and they were like, yeah. And they were right to say this. It wasn't at the top level. Like a lot of his numbers were, lower level domestic stuff in South Africa, occasionally turning up in England and playing a handful of games. He hadn't played anything really that high, maybe some CPL stuff in there. And they said he didn't care. He quite often was a bit lazy in the field because he didn't care. But mostly they were just saying he doesn't have the skills he's needed to be at that top level. No one in cricket would tell you that Shimron Hetmeyer is a more talented player than Joe Root, and no one in cricket would tell you that Ben Cutting is a more talented player than Vernon Philander. But the one thing that I think a lot of people have forgotten over the last little while is just how much Ben Cutting and Shimron Hetmeyer have put into one format of cricket, right? They've decided that's where all their money is coming from, right? Ben Cutting would be a handy county player. Like he could probably bat at number 6 in county cricket, maybe average 30 to 35. And because he's tall as hell, he'll get you some good overs, probably nip him around a little bit from his height and everything else. What's he decided to do? Bowl cutters, pardon the pun, and slog the ball out of the park in the middle overs, right? Like that's basically what he's turned himself into. That doesn't mean he's better than Vernon Philander, but there's so many people that still don't look at that. And it's interesting that we're, what are we, 15 years into this T20 revolution, and still people are talking about that. It's really hard to be Vernon Philander or Joe Root and be an above average T20 player if you are spending so much of your time working on other formats. And I don't think people quite factor that in anymore. The reason that Harry Gurney has a great career and, all these other guys is they start to think about T20 cricket above everything else. And then that's where they get their results.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about Shimron Hetmeyer, who is, as you said, a T20 specialist. He hasn't given West Indies cricket that much importance, and he's basically put all of his eggs in that franchise T20 basket, and he's gotten good results for it. He's been one of Rajasthan's in-form players. He's one of those players that can hit the ball for 6 on his very first delivery. He provides you that utility, good versus pace, good versus spin. lots to like about him. And on the other hand, you have Joe Root, who is someone who prioritizes Test cricket, and I have a lot of respect for him for that. But this is a guy who, in 11 years of the IPL, has never played in the tournament, is featuring for the first time, and that too I have my reservations on. Why in an Ashes year has he opted for warming the bench in the IPL versus perhaps playing county cricket for Yorkshire? So that's another conversation altogether. But if you look at matchups and just utility, you would always send Shimron Hetmyer above Joe Root in that particular situation where you don't have a lot of balls remaining to face. And credit to Joe, in the Bazball era, we've seen him become quite expansive, and he's been quite innovative. You've seen him play some unorthodox shots behind the wicket, and I think that's probably why Joe Root perhaps thought that this might be the right time to exercise his T20 prowess or show the world that he is capable in the format. I do believe that he was in the 2016 squad in which England lost the final. Joe Root had a pretty decent tournament as well.
He did. He played one of the better, let's call it, early T20 innings, that one against South Africa where he chased down that This is what I mean. Like, I've seen, when I first saw Joe Root play, in fact, it was T20 cricket I saw him in. He's opening the bowling for Yorkshire. Straight away I thought, well, this is an above average talent. He got rushed into the England side. If he had played at half as many, half as often, I should say, as Shimron Hetmyer had, he'd be a fantastic player. I'm with you. I don't think he quite has that utility, whereas I think Hetmyer probably can't open, where maybe, I think Root probably could, although that's probably not where he's been named. But Root's probably going to bat number 3 or number 4, whereas I think Hetmyer can probably bat number 3 through to number 7, right? So maybe he has slightly more utility in that way. But Root can bowl. Root's most definitely, I would say, a better fielder. He's fitter as well, although to be fair...
But maybe not in the deep, because Hetmyer in the deep is quite decent, actually.
Well, he's a good athlete. I think he just gets tired towards the back end of games sometimes, just because, Joe Root's just a fitter. I mean, Joe Root's fitter than most cricketers in the world as it is. But although Joe Root's a bit one-paced, whereas I think Hetmyer might have a little bit more zip.
It's also the strategy, really. You look at the ECB and how they pigeonhole certain players.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's not Root's fault, but I don't know why he's there. You got Steve Smith playing for Sussex. You've got Marnus Labuschagne playing for Glamorgan, is it? And he's scoring runs. And you've got Mitchell Starc, who hasn't played the IPL since God knows how long. Pat Cummins has opted out of the IPL as well because it's an Ashes year and they really want to win it in England.
He might not have got a gig, of course, but... But yeah,
I have no clue why Joe Root has opted to warm the bench for Rajasthan as opposed to go play for Yorkshire, because this is a big one, right? And this is his first Ashes after a long time in which he is not going to be captain. So this was the one in which he scores big runs. But yeah, either way, I think you can't blame Rajasthan for not sending Root, but you can question where Joe Root would slot into that lineup. You've got Yashasvi Jaiswal in peak form. You've got Joss Butler, who, regardless of form, will always open for you in T20 cricket. Sanju Samson is someone who's performed really, really well in the IPL over the years. And he's someone who is like Rajasthan through and through. If I'm not wrong, I don't think he's played for any other team ever since he started playing the IPL. Maybe I'm wrong. Don't quote me on this.
He's been around for so long, yeah. I mean, I would...
So, I mean, if you look at the pecking order, you're not sending Joe Root at 5. I reckon even if Hetmyer was, had been dismissed, they probably wouldn't have sent Joe Root in.
Yeah, well, he didn't bat in the game the other day anyway, which was quite funny. We're going to take a break here on Uncovered. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Pakistan, New Zealand. You're listening to Uncovered with Jarrod Kimber. I can't say my name. What's my name? Jarrod Kimber. I'm trying to find the ad while I'm talking. Jarrod Kimber and Behram Qazi.
Our next partner is Athletic Greens. If cricket has taught us anything, it's that green things are good for you. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens every day. I gave AG1 a try because a while back I was stuck in a studio reporting on New Zealand, England on overnight. When those games weren't on, I was up early watching India, Australia at around 4 a.m. In between afternoon naps, I had to watch the Women's World Cup. And when all that was finished, I was doing early mornings for Bangladesh, England. Ignoring the fact that there's too much cricket, that's a stupid schedule for a human being as well. And so Athletic Greens was a far better alternative to ice baths. And after taking it, I felt a lot better. In fact, the whole thing probably kept me sane and healthy at the same time. And also being the kind of nutritional drink I needed to survive those hours, and also the 2 a.m. biltong binges I did a few times. Look, I am not going to pretend I have a balanced diet. So Athletic Greens is how I cover the nutritional basis. 1 small scoop of AG1 with water, and I drink it first thing in the morning each day. Done. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletics Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and also 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Inca. That's the Inca from the end of my Red Inca podcast. So athleticgreens.com/Inca. Check it out now because it is the best green top you'll ever invest in.
Welcome back on Uncovered. I just want to say that last ad, if you're watching on YouTube, I talk about Athletic Greens. It's important to note that on that ad, I say that I have a biltong binge in the middle of the night during the cricket games. It was actually drovas, which I never pronounced correctly, which is part of the reason I didn't say it in the ad. And also, most people don't know what drovas is, but it's a dried South African sausage. But I went with biltong because I think biltong's more widely known. Anyway, next time you're over here, I'll get you some drovas. Anyway, it's beautiful. Beef, I think it's beef dry sausage.
I've had
You'd
the
love.
boeries, the round sausage thing from South Africa.
It's very similar. It's like a dried version of that. Very, very similar. Anyway, I don't know how we got onto South African sausage. From South African sausage, can you take me to Pakistan, New Zealand? What do I need to know? That series ended this week.
Well, I mean, it was a fruitful series for Pakistan. I believe they won that series 4-1. Depleted New Zealand side, but again, a good New Zealand side. I don't think anyone apart from Cole McConkey was really making their debut in that series. And Pakistan really, really needed these ODIs because they've played, 20 odd or 24, 25 ODIs in the last 3.5 years, which is the least amount of ODIs for all major teams. And that's quite harrowing given how good an ODI side Pakistan is. And in a World Cup year, where the Asia Cup has a massive cloud over it, and the Afghanistan ODIs are perhaps the only game time Pakistan might get prior to the World Cup. Of course, fingers crossed, they might schedule something if the Asia Cup doesn't work out. This was seriously important for Pakistan because they needed to plug a few holes, the middle order in particular. Because the top three was sorted, right? Imam, Fakhr, Babar, they've been performing for years. They even performed in the series. Imam got 60 and 90 in the first and third game. Fakhr got the Man of the Series award. He scored a 180, unbeaten 180 in the second ODI, 100 in the first one, and a few low scores in the 30. But that was good enough to win Pakistan the series and Fakhr the Man of the Series award. Babar only had one failure and a 49, 250s, 100, and there was some conversation on that 100 as well. But I don't think that's too important in the context of this subject. But I think Pakistan would be very, very happy with the results. Because I think they've pretty much solved that middle order conundrum. Salman Ali Agha has shown his prowess versus spin bowling, scored handy 50s in the fourth and fifth ODI. And that's very important in a World Cup year, especially in India. So he also provides utility with the ball off spin bowling, good fielder as well. And Iftikhar Ahmed, who wasn't part of the ODI plans, and this is Ifti Mania we're talking about, someone who's gone berserk in T20 cricket this entire year, minus the PSL. I think he's been in terrific form in the BPL. He was breaking records, and I think he has the most number of sixes this year in all of T20 cricket. So he was brought in for the injured Haris Sohail, got a game finally in the fourth ODI, scored a handy 28 of 20-odd balls, and then in the last one, he scored an unbeaten 94. Pakistan lost the game, but his 94 of 72 solved a major issue for Pakistan. Now, interestingly enough, after the win in the fourth ODI and going 4-0 up in the series, Pakistan became number one in the world for a small matter of 48 hours. Of course, Pakistan cricket has a habit of getting to the pinnacle of the rankings and then dropping off like right after, within the blink of an eye. Exactly what happened, but I don't think that matters in the grand scheme of things. What matters is that Babar Azam has gotten a lot of questions answered. He also now knows that Imam must open in the World Cup because Shan Masood was tried in the last two games. Didn't quite fire in the last one, but had a handy 44 in the fourth ODI. So Imam, Fakhr, Babar, then you've got Rizwan at 4, Salman Ali Agha, Iftikhar, or potentially Mohammad Haris, another someone who can really strike the ball at a very, very decent click, and he hits them big. And then you've got arguably one of the better bowling attacks in world cricket in ODI cricket, right? You've got Shadab, Nawaz, and then the three-prong pace attack in Naseem, Haris, and Shaheen. Naseem Shah was particularly brilliant. Not sure why he didn't play the last two games, but he was just on the button in this series. He bowled this one delivery to Mark Chapman, pitched outside leg, uprooted off stump. It was just a peach of a delivery, absolute jaffa. So lots and lots of positives for Pakistan. And I think even if somehow they don't get enough ODIs before the World Cup, at least they're close to or probably have sorted out their first 11, which is a very welcome sign given Pakistan generally tends to sort out their first 11 halfway through the World Cup. We've seen it time and again. So I think it was a positive series for them. And for New Zealand, lots of good questions answered as well. Daryl Mitchell scored 200s at first drop. Kane Williamson is injured and most likely will be during the World Cup. They need someone at one down. And of course, it'll be Daryl Mitchell. I mean, this guy plugs holes for New Zealand all the time, regardless of the format. He'll open in a T20. He'll score hundreds at Lords. And, he was the standout player for New Zealand in that series versus England, the birth of basketball, as we call it. So I think that was a positive for them. Will Young has done well enough as opener, scored 280s at a very decent rate. And I think Finn Allen's spot is, in trouble. Because Finn Allen, I don't even think he's getting a lot of IPL game time. And if Will Young has played, he's played spin really, really well. And the pace as well. So I think in a World Cup year in India, someone who's 30 years old, and that seems to be what's going well for New Zealand, right? Experienced heads in domestic cricket coming to the international fore and working for them. So big positives for them too, even though they lost the series 4-1. Will Young as potential opener, Daryl Mitchell at number 3. And then, of course, you've got lots of guys who are currently playing the IPL who would just be shoo-ins in that ODI team. So
all right,
I think
come on.
for both teams.
You've gone all the way through both teams.
Mm-hmm.
Asia Cup.
I have.
What is your opinion on the Asia Cup? If what we have heard today, and where it's obviously just coming out now, India, Sri Lanka, and I think Bangladesh have said we can't play the Asia Cup in Pakistan because India won't play in it, essentially, which makes sense from a financial point of view if you're those places. Will Pakistan play in it if it's in Sri Lanka, which is the now mooted new destination? Or will they turn their back on the entire tournament, which would seem bizarre, but I suppose possible?
Well, I mean, you can understand the position of the other boards given in India's financial strength and leverage. And I think Pakistan is quite hell-bent on trying their best to somehow find a hybrid solution over here. Maybe India can play their games in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, and Pakistan can play their games in Pakistan. And I think that would be the best of both worlds. But I think this is highly unlikely given broadcasting challenges and everything. And of course, India, has put their foot down pretty much that they won't play in Pakistan, which is sad for Pakistan fans. But if you look at it from, the board's perspective, they have a few options over here. Either they could play the Asia Cup wherever it's being held, but that would be a big blow to their ego. And, they really pride their ego, whether it be Ramiz Raja or Najam Sethi. Their stance has always been the same, that we won't bow down to India, even though they always end up bowing down to India.
We won't bow down to India until we bow down to India.
Yeah. But here is another viable option. If any of the other top nations is available at that time, call them for a bilateral series in Pakistan, have 7 ODIs for all I care, and play them in your home conditions, which are also Asian conditions. Get that confidence booster before the World Cup. And if you really, really want to show a strong stance, then do that. Because, of course, India is not going to, accommodate you in this regard because they have all the leverage. They're pretty much the USA of cricket, right? Let's be honest over here. And if Pakistan are to perform well in this World Cup, they need game time. Regardless of how good the players are, they need to have match practice. And now that they're off for a couple of months, once they get back into it, they will need to have a fair few games under their belt if they are to perform at the best of their abilities. So either Pakistan boycott whatever Asia Cup is happening, go to that Asia Cup, or arrange a series, on the sidelines. I don't know, maybe South Africa's available. They often seem to help Pakistan out in these sort of situations. But that is a viable option, in my opinion, because that would definitely give Pakistan, you got to think about the fans at this point, right? Because they have been waiting for a major tournament to come to Pakistan. And now since 2019, Pakistan has hosted international cricket quite successfully. They haven't really put a foot wrong. There hasn't been any incident. In fact, some teams abandoned their tours in 2021, England and New Zealand. And they've been proven wrong too, because they've come to play over here. Everyone's had positive responses and everything has been conducted very well. So I think if you look at it from a fan point of view, they would much rather play another team, and I would say a decent ODI unit at home versus, cowering down and playing the Asia Cup in foreign land.
Uncovered, Jarrod Kimber and Behram Qazi. We will be back after this break.
If you like what we are making here and you want to know if you can help out, well, you can. On top of asking super chats on our lives, you can also support us through Patreon or buy me a coffee. The more support we can get, the better and more videos we can make. On Patreon, there are plenty of other things we offer too, like a Discord server, the chance to ask questions directly, AMAs, and early versions of our recordings.
This channel only exists because people like you help support it. We have to buy equipment, software, pay wages, and my mortgage, I suppose, just to make this stuff happen. And if you don't have any money available to spend, it isn't just your money we want. Shares, likes, retweets, comments, subscriptions, the little bell icon thing, all of it. They help us build and become more professional, make more videos, better videos, all that sort of stuff. So thank you for watching everything we make and for all your support so far.
Welcome back to the Uncovered podcast. Okay, that was fun, and I didn't even have to put my opinion in, which I really enjoyed. Let's just go on to the retiring women's cricket. So we had an exodus of massive proportions of over the last couple of weeks of players from the women's game retiring. It's probably the second mass exodus we've had in the last, 12 to 18 months. But we also had some even before then where players were starting to do that. Part of the reason is, of course, they're already being paid more in franchise cricket than they are for international contracts for a lot of the women. Not all of them, obviously, but for a lot of the women, that is the case. And so they were leaving. I think, for me, the really interesting thing is, and I put up a tweet about this, but I'll try and explain it a little bit fuller, is in 2013, I think I've got that year right, is when England first turned their women's team professional. And so that's 15 players that they make professional. That's the first time since the 1890s, or 1880s, whenever the Reds versus Blues played each other, that we had a proper professional cricket league for women, or cricket pay for women. That's not to say that no women were paid in between those two things, but not as a league, not en masse, all those sorts of things. So from 2013 to now, I wonder how many sports in the world have developed much quicker than women's cricket has. For instance, I think I've got these numbers right. The WNBA, which is the third biggest women's professional league in the world, is worth about 12.5 to 15 million US dollars per year when it comes to TV rights. And the Women's Premier League obviously is above that already in India. It's almost double that, I think. Certainly it's over 20 million. It might be 24 million or something around that number. So it's gone from zero to that, which is huge. But then you essentially have a bunch of women who in their career span started as amateurs, became professionals, and now are freelancers, right? That's not what we have seen. The last generation of men's amateur cricketers in the top, 8 nations, 12 nations, maybe even, certainly 10 nations, there haven't been that many amateurs. So if you think of Ireland, you probably have players like, Trent Johnson, Kevin O'Brien might have been one of the last sort of amateur players to come through. But even a lot of those other Irish players, Niall O'Brien, Porterfield, Joyce, they were all professionals in England quite early on in their careers. And so it's really rare to have this. And then you have it en masse because before 2013, every woman in the world was an amateur. Unless the only way around that was in some Asian parts, which is mostly India and Sri Lanka, where you were playing for the armed forces, or you're kind of like a semi-amateur and you'd still learn your armed forces job, but actually you'd be there to play cricket. I would still class that as an amateur position, even if you were clearly working towards more being professional at that point. So you've gone from almost the entire world being amateur to a good chunk of the world being professional to now a big chunk being freelance. You do not see that kind of movement in other sports. It's been a dramatic change. There must be players involved. They're having to make decisions that are just so weird to them. But the other thing I'm going to throw to you, mate, is when I first started covering women's cricket, we still had early retirements. But the reason we had early retirements in those days is because those women went off to actually do jobs. Now it's an early retirement from international cricket so they can actually get paid more money to play franchise cricket. It's such a bizarre twist and turn over the last 10 years.
Well, it really is a 0 to 100, right? Like you mentioned, you had no particular avenues for women to go and play franchise cricket. I mean, you had the Women's Big Bash, and I believe the CPL has a women's version as well, or might be coming up with one. But
no, CPL had 2 tournaments. They had a T20 tournament, and I think the women also played a T10 tournament over there as well. But that's very recent.
Yeah, something along those lines.
So you had the 100,
60, was it?
Yeah, the 60. That's it.
Yeah.
They had the 100 and the Women's Big Bash were the 2 big ones, and obviously Fair Break and CPL started within the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Fairbreak is a big one as well. But what the Women's Premier League, the IPL version of the Premier League for women, well, what it has done, like you said, is that it's the third most cash-rich women's league in the world
second.
across all sport. Second?
I
That's
think
ridiculous.
second. I've just done the research on this. It's one of those things it's kind of impossible to get an exact number on. Yeah. But if we believe that the WNBA is was the second biggest, it's gone past that. That I can tell you.
Yeah, well, then it's probably the second biggest. And that really speaks volumes. And look, now you've seen two premier fast bowlers in the women's game, retire early. Or, well, not early, but just retire. And, they've opted for franchise cricket for sure, because you've got the CPL, Fairbreak, you've got, of course, the Women's Premier League. Pakistan might come up with one. They had a few exhibition games and they're very keen on starting one themselves. And that might even be a success, given the PSL has been a success. And you've got other tournaments as well. I'm probably forgetting the 100, of course.
The 100, yeah. I think the next two for me, I think we'll see PSL. I mean, it was going to happen under Rambo. Obviously, now Rambo's not there. That's changed slightly, but I think the PSL will have one. The other one I think will get up very quickly would be Major League Cricket in the US. I think that'd be a huge error for them not to have one. And the South African tournament's the other interesting one coming up, because I suppose it just depends on how much the IPL owners push that. If they push for a women's tournament, there'll be one, and if they won't be. So you're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 tournaments, right? There's a decent tournament in New Zealand as well.
I'd like to highlight one thing, that both of these retirements, of course, Shabnam Ismail and Catherine Sciver-Brunt, amazing fast bowlers in the women's game, but also fast bowlers, right? So you have to take that into consideration. They've only got enough miles in their legs to go on for a certain time, and if they've earned a certain amount of money in their career in international cricket, would they not want to double, triple, quadruple perhaps that amount? And it makes perfect sense. And given that you have so many opportunities across the globe, it's not just one league, it's several leagues, and you can even remain fit. And these are two players who will remain in demand. Let's face it, they're not good. They're not a Chris Green who will get to eventually. They are premier fast bowlers in the women's game. And I think personally, it does make sense for them. And this might be one of those watershed moments in women's cricket where the international game might not be valued much in the future at all. Because if you've got that much money in franchises, why would you opt for international cricket and earn lesser money? Especially, women at times would also, like Bisma Maroof has a kid now. So what if they want to start families in the future? Like, it's harder for them. They have to give birth to children. So this might be a more viable option for women, better bang for buck. And I'm honestly pro women's leagues, because I think this is better for them. This serves them and their cause better than international cricket ever has.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, isn't it? It's at least with the men, we can pretend that international cricket helped the men. The women are just these women. If you're Catherine Brunt, as I said, Catherine Sciver-Brunt, and actually both of those women, they both started as amateurs, right? No one even wanted to pay them, right? They had to pay their own way and get their own way in. So no, I think, and the fast bowling thing is really interesting. What I now believe is, because these boards are just taking too long to get to a decent amount of pay, Fairbreak pays a decent wage, and obviously the Big Bash pays a nice decent wage. The 100, not too bad. And I'm talking about for the major players, not for the medium players.
I've got a question for you. How much do the Kiwi, the White Ferns, earn with respect to people who play franchise women's cricket? Because I know the White Ferns are really, really well paid, aren't they?
The White Ferns are well paid when it comes to, don't they get the same match fees as the men? I don't think it's the overall contracts. I think the best paid women are the Australians, which is the same with international cricket, really, depending on how the Indian. We don't know exactly the fees of all the Indian players because of the way that works, but I think it's still the Australian women. But yeah, I think we will see a max exodus with the New Zealand women eventually as well, because I don't think the match fees are that high. Also, the thing is, you still have to be good enough to be at that level, right?
Absolutely.
And if
Pez opts for franchise T20 cricket, then that would be a major loss to women's cricket, because people tune in just to watch Elise Perry.
Exactly. So my thought is, based on what we've seen in the last 18 months, and if they do have 2 or 3 more leagues, how far are we away from the best women's players not playing World Cups anymore? Right? Not playing for their international teams at all. Like, we've seen a lot of retirements. We haven't seen the other side of it. But if you look at the percentage of players who've stepped away, we saw a little bit of this when the IPL started, of course. We saw a couple of players towards the end of their career doing that. It could be that, but I'm not sure it is. I think it might actually be, the
quality of women's cricketers in leagues would probably surpass that in international cricket at one point, because if that's how well they're paid over there, and honestly, it's not like women play a lot of test cricket, right? It's not like you have that charm for them. It's basically doesn't, I mean, of course, sure, you have that odd test or two every year for the big three, but that's about it, isn't it?
Well, if you're Susie Bates, is she, I mean, at this stage, she's just holding on, hoping that she gets a test match, right? What a ridiculous career to play and never play a test match. So they don't have that, right? A lot of them will remember back when they were rated by their boards that they're involved with, right? There's obviously other pressures, as we've seen with some of the South African cricketers and their treatment and everything else. There's a lot of issues going on there. I can easily see how women's cricket actually goes franchise far quicker than men's does at this rate. And I think we need 2 or 3 more strong competitions, to do that. The other thing that you mentioned was really interesting before. If you tour with an international team, generally those tours are quite long. Like even for women's cricket, they're quite long. I remember talking to Sean Martin, the guy who runs for Fairbreak, and he was saying to me that they didn't want their tournaments to go much longer than 2 weeks. And the reason is that there are a lot of mothers that play and a lot of people who have other duties that men get let off. If you're playing international cricket, you get let off all your duties, whereas women still have to organize things. And so there is an opportunity that the women might actually go, well, international cricket, I might have to go to England for a month, whereas actually I can go to this franchise tournament, make slightly less, but it's only 2 weeks. I'm a star here. They want me rather than, this is the big thing. Go back to the Kolpak, right? Situation. Oh, I don't think people realize that if you're not in the top 8 players, automatically, and I mean a dead set certainty, your career is a little bit between I might get paid to play international cricket, or they might find someone better and I'm back in domestic cricket making no money again. The women's game's exactly the same. Like if you're not at that top level of international, you're probably far better off to go and get a more steady position in franchise cricket. And as we said before, work on your skills to make sure that you're the best T20 player you are, not spend a lot of time bowling 10 overs and if you're a fast bowler slowing yourself down. Just on all that, just to say, this happens to be the same week when Chris Green has finally got his first class contract. So if you go back, I did a video 4 months ago, I think now, about Chris Green, because it was absolutely fascinating that you had the poster boy for T20 cricket, someone who had never played first class cricket, didn't look like he wanted to, didn't look like first class cricket wanted him, comes out of nowhere and basically, like a lot of players do, and I think someone played me an interview of Alex Stewart on TalkSport, I think, recently, where Alex Stewart was talking about the same sorts of things that I talk about. Part of it is insurance, right? You want your insurance paid for. Part of it is physio and dietitian and all those sorts of things. Sometimes mental health stuff. A lot of it is facilities. You want to be able to use ball machines. You want to be able to have great cricket nets. You want to be able to have great bowlers bowling to you. If you're not part of a first-class setup, a lot of those things are very hard to get, which is why a lot of people don't go franchise. Don't go freelance only. Yeah. They keep their contracts. So Chris Green is a really interesting test case of someone who obviously decided to go back towards red ball cricket when for the first 8-9 years of his career hadn't played any red ball cricket. The other interesting thing about Chris Green is we pigeonhole these guys as white ball specialists because they play a lot of white ball cricket. He absolutely starred for New South Wales when he went back to play for them as well. In fact, someone tweeted me today saying he should have been captaining. So absolutely remarkable turnaround there from Chris Green. I just want to mention that because I want to mention that as much because I knew if I didn't mention it, everyone would be in my comments for the rest of the time doing that. Just I think we've got 2 super chats made before we leave. The first one's by Rohan, who he's given us the money and then he's put the super chat separate. Rohan says, what's happened to the country-specific 99.94 DM podcast? Will they be uploading any content soon? It is my very sad duty to say that it's not completely shut down, but I believe 99.94 is going to be shut down and very, very soon completely. Obviously, someone else offers me some money after listening to this podcast. We can still look around. We still have the talent. Oh, in fact, most of the podcasters have been absolutely desperate to get involved and contact me regularly, asking if there's been any updates. But I'm pretty sure that the entire thing is going to be shut down this week. It's very sad for me. I want to thank Shankar and Vasu and John and all the team. We had so many people working across it. But eventually we just didn't get the investment that we needed to be able to continue that going. Thank you to everyone who listened. But yeah, as far as I'm aware right at the moment, Rohan, and I will write an email about this in the next week or so, but I'm pretty sure that is the end of 99.94. But thank you very much for your super chat. And Aditya says, hey, Jarrod, what do you think of the IPL having an option where they can play 5 overseas players as long as at least 2 of them are from Asian countries like Afghanistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan? I'm not sure what the IPL would specifically get from that, but I will say this, that when I interviewed to be the general manager of the IPL, one of my first things was that they should allow you to bring in an extra player if it was from an associate nation. So you could have 4 overseas players, and then if you wanted a 5th, they had to be, Ali Khan or Sandeep Lamachani. I suppose I don't know where Sandeep's legal troubles are at the moment. So, but those kinds of players coming in, George Munzie, I suppose, would be another one off the top of my head. Callum McLeod, Erasmus. I'm trying to think who else is out there. Some of the Dutch guys, whoever it may be. Some of the even Papua New Guinea, maybe not quite strong enough, but someone like Charles Amini, if he got his leg spin up to a slightly higher level. I thought that would be a really interesting one. So from a PR perspective, it would be really cool, but also from a narrative perspective, it's really cool. Like the one thing I've noticed about the Big Bash in Australia is when you have Mujib and Rashid and Sandeep Lamachani, and they just make so much extra media content and social media content out of having those players. For me, it's a really weird thing not to have. But Aditya, I think if you follow my stuff, you know that I just don't think that we actually need. I think Indian cricket is more than strong enough to not even need the overseas limits anymore. I think, and I also think that'd be really cool because I think one franchise might have like 8 or 9 Indian players, and another franchise might have like 2 Indian players. Like the sort of weird, sidelines that you could have from that sort of stuff. I think we're years away from having politically allowing that to happen. But I actually think it'd be a really cool thing. In some ways, I think it makes the Indian players then even more important. You don't have to have a couple of guys in your squad or in your team that just aren't up to it, but they happen to be Indian and you can't get a strong enough team. So I think it would make the IPL a far stronger league if we did that. But
Ravi Shastri keeps talking about how, franchise cricket and the IPL in particular is the future. But I think with that restriction of international players per team, it's not as attractive for the players, because if they have limited game time, then how is that going to work? You look at the Premier League in English football, and there's no such limitation, right? You could have a team of 11 Brazilians and no English player whatsoever, and you could still field that team. So maybe increase the number of teams in the IPL, make it like a longer competition, and don't have any restrictions at all, and maybe allow Pakistani players to play in it.
Well, the whole Pakistani thing is really interesting anyway, because if let's say the Saudis, right, or the Americans actually work this out.
The Saudis are in this, right?
Well, that's what I mean. Or the major league takes off or whatever. There's going to be a time when there is a potential, and I do mean a potential, because if the Indian players aren't allowed, maybe it will never happen, but the Saudis could do this, where you could actually have all the best players, let's say in Saudi Arabia playing. The IPL is no longer the strongest league, right? That's a small percentage chance of happening, although having a look at the large bank accounts of the Saudis, it's a possibility. And at that stage, you've kind of put yourself into a bit of a corner, right? You haven't allowed Pakistanis to play. You've got limits on your own players. It's more a hypothetical for if and when the Saudis take over. Maybe more. I want to say if, but when is possible.
Amazing, actually, if the Saudis can pull that off, that no player limitations, because there are no Saudi cricketers, right? I mean, not that I've heard of. And you just have the best players from across the world playing that franchise tournament and making like the big bucks, IPL level bucks. That would change cricket. But for that, they'd obviously have to first build those stadiums and everything. But knowing like the tourism sort of push that MBS is going towards in Saudi Arabia, you never know that those stadiums might be up in a year. You never really know.
Here's the best one, I think, which I think this will break a lot of people's brains. What if Saudi Arabia decided, wait a minute, IPL's kind of already cornered this market. We don't want to do that. What if we just bought Test cricket?
Playing red ball cricket in Saudi Arabia is not a good idea, Jarrod.
Well, if you have a look, not all the Saudi tournaments are in Saudi Arabia. And you're also forgetting the other thing. They would build air-conditioned stadiums.
True.
Do you know what I mean? They have so much money, things like that. But I'm just saying, there is a possibility that something random like that happens as well. I was talking about that on a recent podcast. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Behram, you can follow him at Deaf Mango, the deafest of the fruits on Twitter. You can follow me at a Jarrod Kimber. Huge thanks to everyone, especially our 2 super chatters, Rohan and Aditya there, but everyone else who was in the room as well. We had so much to talk about today. We couldn't get to as many comments as we normally do. But obviously, if you want to ask more questions, myself and Bharat will be back on Wednesday night, England time. Thursday morning, Bharat's time to do the wagon wheel. But a huge shout out to everyone who came in, and thank you very much. And we will see you all again very, very soon. And by that I mean next week. As you can see, I am vamping, looking for the ad.
Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, people would ask my dad if he wanted me to be Viv Richards. And he always said no, he wanted me to be Boycott, because apparently he liked boring things. But anyway, it turned out I could be neither. But thanks to Bodyline t-shirts, I can wear clothes showing both players. The Boycott Stick of Rhubarb is one of my favourite t-shirts. I really like the design. And it's not the only one I love. There's also a WG Grace one where he's in a pedalo, which is a part of my everyday wardrobe now. But there are heaps of other cool shirts on this site, and you can search for them by nations or type, and they seem to add to them all the time. I'm a big fan of the Court Marsh Bold Lily in the Australian collection, and there's also a lovely Morning Everyone in honour of Richie Benno's great greeting. The English area has the Fast Leg Theory shirt, which I think is a ripper. There's a couple of great West Indian ones I love, including this simple Viv Richards design, and a couple of Capel Dev t-shirts in the Indian section that I simply must have. I'm not saying that Bodyline t-shirts will have something that you will like, but I will say this: they got me to wear a Jeffrey Boycott inspired t-shirt. And that in it